Morning. Can you hear me?
Hi, Tara.
There you are. I can see you now. Good morning to you. And that's me. Hey.
Lovely and
All
elegant.
right. Does it look okay? Am I too close, too far? Where do I need to be? There?
Looking lovely as always. I
Told
think
you to be
my voice
biased.
is reaching late. That's what I think. I will have to fix it quickly. Is my voice proper? Is my voice clear? Yes.
Good morning, Deewanshi.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm well. I just want to make sure that I'm pronouncing your name properly. Deewanshi Vats.
Absolutely, Deewanshi, yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And to make sure,
طب
Ghina,
لحظة
is
لاحظ
it?
الأوديو هلا أنا حكيت ما
It's okay.
حيوصل هلا. Tara, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, now you can hear me? هلا صوتي.
Okay.
ثلاثة.
شوف زوم.
لا ما فيني تخليها هيك، يعني بصور صورتي بالتاب.
صح. طيب اوكي. بدك اعمل تيست معك تخليني؟
ايه
أه؟
بحطك هوست.
You're perfectly centered on the camera, Ghina. And when you speak, your voice is clear. Is the speaking order going to be the same as it is on the poster?
It is. It is the same.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
محمد شوف الكيبل بسرعه. من اللي تيست على يدي؟ هذا هو.
Will the audience be joining the meeting in this room or only on YouTube?
The audience will be on YouTube, but we did invite only few to join us here who are like special rapporteurs and from the OHCHR. If they joined us, then please, after the participants say their speeches, you can open the floor for the VIP audience, so to speak, who can participate. However, if
okay.
not, then you can ask us questions.
Yeah, are we taking questions from YouTube or are we taking questions only from the audience inside the room?
No, we're not taking questions from YouTube, just from here.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Thank you. Do we wait for the others to join? No way. I see your illustrious cameraman.
Yeah, that's because I'm in a studio and they're preparing the setup, and so
Yes, but the point is that I know that person very well. Look at you.
And Tara,
he's not the
Hi,
cameraman and he says hi.
Salam.
I'm not hearing you. She has
You
the
have
face.
the best director in the world.
I miss you too much, sis.
Oh, stop it. It's great to see you. You made my day. Good morning, Ilef.
Hi, Tara. How are
How
you?
are you doing today?
Good.
بدي أعطيك network.
Good, alhamdulillah. It's nice to see your kafia. Free Palestine.
Good
Yep.
morning.
سلام سيد
عم
يوسف
نسمع مرتين
المحافظة
عندك.
كيفك؟
نرجع بعدين نرجع نسمع مرة تانية، صوته وصوتي بس عندي مش
الحمد
عنده.
لله.
أنا عندي عم يسمع.
عنده
Can you all
الهمة.
hear me okay with
ما
no
قاعد
echo?
هيك.
أوكي تأكدي هلا.
Someone let me know if you can hear me okay with no echo.
Absolutely. You're
Ah,
audible just
great.
fine. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Deewanshi.
Hello, Syed.
Bakr
How
Darwish. Look at these names that I haven't seen in person for such a long
Hi,
time.
everybody.
Great to see you all. Super.
طيب أوكي، لكن بس خليه يفوت قبل حتى حمله هوست.
Bravo.
Just a moment and we'll start.
أعطيتيني إلي هالأبروف. هلا صوتك مش طالع. آه.
Dina, will you raise a hand when we're ready to begin, please? Thank you. Good morning from Dublin, Ireland. This is Tara Rayner O'Grady, President of No Peace Without Justice. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with a group of people, many whom I've known for long years, since 2011's Pearl Revolution, which was the uprising in Bahrain in absolute protest to the many violations by the Al Khalifa monarchy against the people of Bahrain. This session this morning is in light of the upcoming session on Bahrain by the UN Committee Against Torture. The Bahrain Forum for Human Rights is organising this virtual seminar under the title Human Rights Perspective, Bahrain's fourth report to the Committee Against Torture. Our guest speakers today include Ilef KASSAB, who is the Middle East North Africa Human Rights Advisor at the World Organization Against Torture. Good morning to you, Ilef. We have Said Yusuf, my longtime colleague and friend, who's a human rights researcher and advisor at Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. Good morning to you, Said Yusuf. We have Deewanshi Vats, Advocacy and Research Assistant at the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, who, again, I've worked with over many years. Deewanshi, welcome to our discussion this morning. And Ghina Rebai, who joins us from the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights, whose work I have also followed for many years. Without further ado, I'd like to have our first speaker begin. And I'm really keen to hear from each of you. I know that we will open for questions and answers from the floor after each of you have given your brief presentation. So Ilef KASSAB, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thank you to the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights for organizing this timely discussion. My name is Ilef KASSAB, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the World Organization Against Torture, also known as OMCT, as its MENA Human Rights Advisor. OMCT has followed Bahrain's engagement with the Committee Against Torture since its first review. Through our global network, we document cases, report victims, and track how states translate their treaty obligations into practice. And from that perspective, Bahrain's fourth periodic report reflects a familiar pattern, that of a state that performs compliance through structure, but not through substance. Based on our analysis of the 2017 concluding observations issued by the Committee Against Torture and the list of issues prior to reporting communicated to the government of Bahrain in 2021, as well as the state's own follow-up report of 2018 and its fourth periodic report of 2021, of course, together with the extensive alternative submissions from Bahraini and international civil society, we have identified 4 key observations. The first one is that there is an architecture of reform without results. When the committee last reviewed Bahrain in 2017, it issued very clear recommendations under Articles 2 and 12 of the Convention Against Torture and Ill Treatment, ensure prompt and impartial investigations, and hold perpetrators accountable. But 8 years later, the state reports a dense architecture of reforms, namely laws, commissions, oversight bodies, and training, but it still hasn't produced results that meet those obligations. The Ombudsman, the Special Investigation Unit, the National Institution for Human Rights, etc., all are formally active, yet remain subordinate to either the Ministry of Interior or the public prosecution. The reports highlight workshops and visits, but never prosecutions or convictions. To this day, there's no recorded criminal conviction under Article 208 of Bahrain's Penal Code for acts of torture, despite hundreds of documented allegations. This reflects a managed form of accountability. We have institutions that absorb criticism but rarely deliver justice. Our second observation is that torture is a practice that never ended. The committee has repeatedly emphasized that under Article 2.2, no exceptional circumstances may justify torture. Yet, independent documentation from our network members and partners continues to show that it persists, especially in the context of political detention. Defenders like Abdelhadi Al-Khawaja and Dr. Abdel Jalil Sengais remain arbitrarily detained more than a decade after the committee's earlier concerns. Both were tortured and both now suffer serious health consequences compounded by deliberate medical neglect, which is an ongoing violation of Article 16, which prohibits cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment. Conditions in Jau prison and dry dock, as you know, include prolonged solitary confinement, denial of medical care, and collective punishments. At least 2 political prisoners died due to medical negligence, which triggered the Stop the Slow Death policy protests. Even minors detained in connection with demonstrations have reported physical assaults and threats of sexual violence during interrogation. These are not remnants of the past. They are routine practices enabled by impunity and the absence of independent judicial oversight. This takes us to our third observation, which is there is oversight without independence and monitoring without access. Bahrain's periodic report highlights national mechanisms meant to prevent torture, but independence cannot exist within the same power structures that are accused of abuse. Under Article 12 of the Convention Against Torture, investigations must be impartial and independent, yet domestic bodies conduct inquiries behind closed doors, publish no detailed findings, and remain answerable to institutions under the executive branch. At the international level, Bahrain continues to deny access to the Special Rapporteur on Torture, whose request for a counter-visit has been pending since 2011. It has also not ratified the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, which would enable independent monitoring of detention facilities. And without the optional protocol to the Convention and without transparent data, oversight becomes an internal audit rather than a preventive mechanism. Finally, impunity in Bahrain is policy. And this is our fourth observation. So basically, the core of Bahrain's non-compliance lies in its treatment of torture allegations as disciplinary issues rather than criminal offenses. Under Article 4 of the Convention, all acts of torture must be criminalized and punished with penalties reflecting their gravity. But investigations are still conducted by entities tied to the same chain of command, and most cases end with administrative sanctions, if anything. This isn't a gap in capacity. It's a political decision to manage impunity through procedure. The state presents institutions and legal safeguards and references, not legal safeguards, legal references instead of data. No number of complaints received, no prosecutions opened, no convictions delivered. The absence of public disaggregated data undercuts Bahrain's credibility and prevents the committee from assessing whether its obligations under Articles 12 and 13, which are investigation and complaint mechanisms, are being fulfilled. For victims and families, this means that the denial of justice has itself become a continuing form of ill treatment. So based on these elements, the upcoming CAT review of Bahrain should refocus attention on measurable implementation rather than formal reform. Thus, we urge the Bahraini authorities and encourage the committee to recommend the creation of an independent investigative mechanism that is separate from the Ministry of Interior and the public prosecution, empowered to access detention sites and refer cases for prosecution as required under Articles 12 and 13, publishing quarterly disaggregated data on torture complaints, investigations, and prosecutions to ensure transparency and allow verification, the suspension of executions and reviewing of all death penalty cases that involve torture or coerced confessions, in line with Article 15 on the inadmissibility of evidence obtained under torture, guaranteeing immediate access to legal counsel and an independent medical examination within 24 hours of detention, and video record all interrogations in facilities under the security apparatus, ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, and invite the Special Rapporteur on Torture for an in-country visit with unrestricted access, and protect human rights defenders, families, and victims from reprisals, and make sure they can safely communicate with UN mechanisms. Each of these measures is specific, verifiable, and achievable within a defined time frame if there is political will. Bahrain's fourth periodic report reads like a declaration of completion, but reform cannot be declared. It has to be proven. Passing laws and creating bodies is not compliance. Compliance means that no one is tortured, and if they are, someone is held accountable. For Bahrain, the real test of the convention lies not in the number of institutions it can list, but in the number of victims it can deliver justice to. Because in the end, the prohibition of torture is not a symbolic ideal under Article 2. It's an absolute duty, and definitely one that remains unfulfilled in Bahrain. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ilef. I think that obviously your recommendations are what we all would wish for in not only, I mean, aspirationally an ideal world, but it's what we as countries have asked for, the bare minimum of our human rights. And I have a lot of questions that it's raised for me for update, which I hope I have an opportunity to ask you towards the end of our discussion today. Our second speaker, Said Yusuf Al-muhafdha, if I can welcome you to the floor, please, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you again, Tara, and thank you to Bahrain Forum for Human Rights for inviting me to speak about this important event and important topic, which is, and I think it's very important that we raise this issue, especially with the release of many prisoners in Bahrain. So my first question will be, has the mistreatment or torture stopped in Bahrain? The answer is no. It hasn't. The culture of impunity remains the root cause of that, and violation escalate or decrease according to the orders from above. That's my own evaluation. The number of torture cases in general has decreased relatively, not because there has been any progress, but because the method have changed. Similarly, the number of detainees, which was before in 1,000, now these days does not exceed around, let's say, 500. So that makes sense. That's behind the reason. Therefore, it's natural that the cases of torture has decreased. However, just a week ago, detainee Ali Dawood Al-Aradi, he claimed that he was subjected to mistreatment in Joe prison, and he claimed that he was beaten. He claimed also that he was subjected to sectarian and hate speech by a prison official. So when this incident has spread on social media, the Ministry of Interior official were upset and angry as usual. So they turned the victim into preparator. So what happened that the officer involved in that torture or mistreatment, he filed a legal complaint against the victim to mislead the public and to make the victim the guilty. And that's their own tactic, and they have done that to many victims, victim of torture in the last few months, years. So this is a clear example of the culture of impunity that I talked about and the protection of hate speech, which came from state because he's a security personally, and he was, or I mean, the security officials in Bahrain are trained by British programs, which is paid by British taxpayer. So, anyways, I mean, today I would like to discuss also an important topic: transitional justice and psychological rehabilitation of victims of torture, especially those who have been recently released from the prison, either from royal pardons, alternative sentence law, or open prison program. So, the basic principle and guidelines on the right of redress and reparation for victims of torture, it's guaranteed within the international human rights law. And the purpose of that is that we have an effective and immediate reparation to promote justice by addressing massive human rights violation of a human rights law or serious violation of international human rights law. So what I would like to say that transitional justice does not seek punishment in its essence, but rather aims to establish accountability, provide preparation, and restore victims. And also it will lead to the trust in the state and society and their ability and the ability of the state to protect them. So according, to Salam for Democracy, there are, almost more than 3,000 people in the last few years who have been released, and the majority of them reported being subjected to torture, ill treatment, or psychological torture or abuse. So, for instance, we have Abdel Zahra Mushema, who was released from prison, lost his memory, and he's suffering in a serious mental health or a disease, a serious mental disease. He's right now in the hospital. And Muhammad Abdel Amir, Habib Al Fardan, and many other prisoner of conscience who have been released and facing a very serious consequences, and the state doesn't do anything to them. Unfortunately, we have not heard or witnessed or of any state-sponsored program to achieve a transitional justice or provide reparation or hold preparators accountable, or rehabilitate or any kind of integration to the society and empowerment of those victims. On contrary, many victims, in my opinion, are caught in a circle, trying to restore or reclaim their rights, which have been violated in the time that they were in the prison. So they are only in that circle. So this has become their primary, focus and concern for the past 3 years, instead of being included in programs and courses and such, which I have already mentioned. So my call is here is not only for the government, just to be very clear and honest, to comply with their obligation, but also to individual victim of torture and ill treatment to document what they have been subjected, because not all of them has documented to human rights organization. And yes, right now it's might be for them it's not important, but at later point it will be very important. So just to conclude, I would like to say that kind of this current police state behavior and attitude did not contribute, will not contribute to compliance with international human rights obligation or to Bahrain international human rights obligation, and it will not implement even the relevant or the local constitutional provision that protect human rights and people rights. Rather, it will undermine this obligation. So I'm kind of for me, it's my main goal. For example, if we are campaigning for the release of the prisoner, for example, for me it's not this is my main focus, but rather ensuring that the enjoyment of those individuals of their rights and addressing the human rights challenging that lead to their arrest also. And the main reason that lead that protester to the street to demonstrate and to fight. So for me, I mean, I support always the idea of addressing the core of the problem and its root, rather than reacting to the challenging that raise here and during and before or after the release. So for me, unfortunately, the national security apparatus dominates over many human rights institution and many government body. And for me, it's impossible of these institutions to fulfill with their national human rights role or agenda with this domination. So what my demands to that the government developed a national human rights project that include transitional justice within the National Human Rights Plan. We do have in Bahrain a National Human Rights Law. And that's why we want to include this also in the Bahrain Human Rights Agenda. And this project should involve relevant and experienced civil society organization in the field of rehabilitation of victims. And this must be proceed by the official recognition and a political will, as my colleague already mentioned, that a political will, and we must move, for me, from denial to addressing this issue by developing a national public policies that prevent torture and hold perpetrators accountable. And also, if I speak about the Special Investigation Unit, for example, which has, in my opinion, and many human rights organization opinion and conclusion, that they have failed to prevent torture. I mean, it should, for my opinion, it should be granted the necessary space and independence, which they don't have. Unfortunately, the Special Investigation Unit has merely shelved cases, kind of they closed the cases, categorizing them also as isolated incidents of torture, and even they don't use the word torture, to be very clear. And it's also worth noting that the Special Investigation Unit received a torture complaint 2 months ago from a Bahraini victim, but they failed to investigate until now. Perhaps it's because the perpetrator are member of national security apparatus. So very final demands. We demand already. I think my colleagues mentioned that we demand the ratification of Optional Protocol, also the adoption of Istanbul Protocol as a guide for effective investigation and documentation of torture. We also demand the special rapporteur to be allowed to visit to Bahrain, and also to investigate in all human rights violation committed by national security apparatus, and also an open and rehabilitation center in Bahrain, and also finally opening a permanent office from the Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights, a permanent with the with the wide with the big authorization for this mandate to be operated in Bahrain. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Said Yusuf. Again, you've raised more questions than answers there. And it sounds like you and I have been running the same record for the last 14 or 15 years. If I can give the floor, please, to Deewanshi Vats, who has been working with the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. You have the floor, Deewanshi. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and hello to all my colleagues that have joined. And my name is Deewanshi Vats. I work as an advocacy and research assistant with Bahrain Center for Human Rights. And as already rightly highlighted by all of my fellow speakers here, that this discussion definitely comes at a very crucial moment ahead of Bahrain's review by Committee Against Torture. It is just not a periodic reporting exercise. It can serve, if there is will, as an opportunity to examine whether Bahrain's commitment under the convention have translated into the real protection for detainees and accountability for torture. Our organization expresses deep concern over the deteriorating situation that is happening inside of the Jao Central Prison, where recent incidents indicate a serious escalation of torture, abuse, medical neglect, and sectarian discrimination against detainees. As Ilef, my fellow speaker from OMCT, has also highlighted that torture in Bahrain is not a remnant of the past, but a practice that persists under conditions of impunity. The Bahrain Center for Human Rights fully shares this concern. Our latest documentation shows that within Jao Central Prison, the situation continues to deteriorate, and I would like to share some recent incidents of the same. According to some of our verified reports from our network and local human rights sources, Dr. Ahmed Khalil, a prisoner of conscience, was transferred to solitary confinement after requesting medical treatment. Instead of receiving health care, he was punished for asserting his right to treatment, a clear violation of both Bahrain's prison law and also the Mandela rules under the international law. 12 detainees in Building 12 recently suspended their hunger strike after the public prosecution promised to convey their demands to senior officials. These include improved medical care, end to punitive restrictions, and unconditional release. Prisoners stressed, however, that this suspension is only temporary and it is actually pending any actual implementations. On 5th November 2025, very recently, prisoner Ali Dawood Al-Aradi was physically assaulted by 2 guards while being transferred from Salmania Hospital. The attack was accompanied by sectarian insults targeting religious figures, sparking protests inside the prisons. And in the response, detainees in Building 5 and Building 12 launched peaceful sit-ins and chants demanding accountability from the authorities, but the authorities retaliated by canceling family visits, restricting their meals, and threatening the use of force to end the protests. Families of these detainees now warn that the situation risks a complete breakdown, urging the Ministry of Interior to de-escalate, stop these provocations, and ensure detainee safeties. Thus, the situation, as also highlighted by my fellow speakers, is really on the verge of breakdown, and therefore BCHR, my organization, calls on the Bahraini authorities to end the use of solitary confinement and punitive transfers, conduct an independent and impartial investigation into the assault of the prisoners, guarantee unhindered access to medical treatment without reprisal, restore family visits and communications without any restrictions, and protect detainees from discrimination and uphold the freedom of religion in detention facilities. Also, these acts are not isolated. They represent serious and ongoing violations of Bahrain's international human rights obligations. The use of solitary confinement as punishment, denial of these medical treatments, and sectarian targeting of detainees all breach the Convention Against Torture, as also emphasized by my fellow speakers. Torture, cruel and inhuman treatment, and discrimination based on religion are absolutely prohibited under international law. The persistence of such practices demonstrate not only a failure of accountability, but also a systematic disregard for human dignity and the rule of law within Bahrain's detention system. Our director, Nidal Al-Salman, also has emphasized again and again that death penalty sentences in Bahrain are often issued following confessions extracted under torture, a practice that remains incompatible with the Article 2 of the Convention, which allows no justification for torture under any circumstances. The ongoing mistreatment of prisoners of conscience in Jao prison reflects a systematic crisis that demands urgent international attention, particularly from the Committee Against Torture, UN Special Procedures, and Bahrain's partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Deewanshi. Our final speaker is Ghina Rebai, whom I'm eager to hear from. Ghina is with Montada, Bahrain. The floor is yours, Ghina.
Thank you very much, Tara. And greetings to all our colleagues who are participating in this seminar and to everyone watching. Well, here we are again, participating in another seminar about torture that Bahraini citizens, especially prisoners of conscience, went through and are still going through. And impunity for perpetrators also still goes on. The forms of torture and arbitrary reasons for torture are many, but in my speech, I want to emphasize on the forms of torture that are more prominently going on according to the Bahrain Forum's monitoring of violations. So through the last decade, or more than a decade now, there has been an escalation in torture in Bahrain since 2011. And many forms of torture were taking place. But the rates of torture change from time to time. That is why I want to emphasize on the forms of torture that are now still going on after all the promises that Bahrain gives in international seminars, like in the UPR or whatsoever, its reports. I want to prove they are not true. That's the truth. First, as arbitrary detentions still take place against human rights defenders, civil activists, political activists, children, religious figures, etc. Just during this year, 2025, we have monitored about 200 cases of arbitrary detentions. And in many of these cases, torturous practices continue to be used by security agencies during arrest procedures. In many of these cases, arrests happen through raiding homes and exposing those arrested directly to physical torture and terrifying their families. Some other arrest procedures happened while suppressing peaceful protest and demonstration through the use of excessive violence. I'm still stuck in this year, 2025. So what I'm trying to convey in my first point is that in many cases, torture is implemented from the moment a Bahraini citizen is arbitrarily arrested, not just after the arrest, not just in prison. And there were tens of such cases that happened this year. The second form of torture that I want to emphasize on, or let me say the second stage of torture, is what the prisoners suffer from after they get detained, is the physical and mental torture that they get exposed to, especially during interrogations directly after they get arrested. Here it is very crucial to mention the consequences of those torture procedures, because not only those violent procedures leave their marks on the detainees physically and mentally, which in many cases led to the need of years of medical treatment, but also it is based on those torture procedures that detainees get forced to confess to false allegations that lead to their arbitrary judicial conviction, which could be long years in prison or even the death penalty, as happened to 3 prisoners of conscience in 2017 and 2 prisoners of conscience in 2019. For example, victim of execution, Ali Al-Arab, who was subjected to electroshocks and got his toenails uprooted before he blindfoldedly signed to confessions that he didn't even read, was executed in 2019 based on those confessions that the court refused to take into consideration in a clear complicity of the Bahraini judiciary in the torture procedures that occurred, which intensifies our concerns about what legal procedures could be taken to defend victims of torture in Bahrain locally. Especially that today there are 12 prisoners of conscience sentenced to death on torture confessions, so to speak, and they have exhausted all their legal appeals. The third stage of torture that I want to address is the daily life torture that prisoners endure, whether in an individual manner or in a collective manner. We have monitored more than 140 cases of torture in Bahraini prisons this year, 2025. Some of them were physical torture, such as severe beating, spraying pepper spray on prisoners by prison guards, or some were threats of using excessive violence. Some were denial of basic rights, especially the right to medical treatment, which led to the deterioration of the health of many prisoners. Some other forms of psychological torture, like solitary confinement, long solitary confinement sometimes, the denial to family visits, the denial to phone calls with families, and so on. I want to shed light mostly on the denial of medical treatment. It is important to mention it because it's important to mention how severe the consequences of denying proper medical care can be. 4 prisoners of conscience in Bahrain died due to poor medical treatment. 2 of them in 2021 and 2 in 2014. So there are also more cases, but I'm mentioning the last few years because I don't want to speak about like 10 years ago, and then Bahrain would say, okay, we made improvement and so on. I want to prove there were no improvements. So 2 in 2021 and 2 in 2024, prisoners of conscience died due to poor medical treatment and continuous demands and their families' demands for proper and more professional medical treatment, which they submitted to the relevant authorities. Today, there are prisoners submitting similar demands and receiving similar neglect, which we consider very alarming as it imposes a potential threat to their lives. Yes, to their lives and to their long-term medical conditions. Those are the forms of torture we find most prominent and most alarming amongst all forms of torture that are currently happening as well in Bahraini prisons. And in the end, to conclude, I would like to emphasize that cases of torture in Bahrain are simultaneously linked to almost total impunity and complicity by the governmental and judicial authorities. Based on that, independent human rights organizations demand that, especially the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights, psychological and medical support for victims of torture should be provided with financial and moral compensation in accordance with international standards. Perpetrators of torture should be held accountable, including senior security officials, not only lower-level officers. In many cases, just lower-level officers get used as scapegoats, so to speak. But the truth is, senior security officials are most of the time more responsible. So impunity must be lifted from all those who are involved in torture. Regular visits by international monitoring mechanisms such as the UN observers with public reports after each visit should be allowed. Restrictions on local independent human rights organizations should be lifted, and they should be enabled to document freely and operate freely inside Bahrain and be protected from any possible harassment. Thank you very much, in hope that we will not have to meet again under this title. Thank you for listening.
Thank you too, Ghina, very much. I'll be opening to the floor for questions in a minute. I just wanted to ask, if I may, a couple of questions myself. So you were talking about the hierarchy of people who are perpetrators of torture. I know that one of the Crown Prince's brothers is also accused of torture, and there's a gentleman who lives in exile in the UK who was tortured personally by him. And with regards to that, considering that there is no access to redress or judicial accountability inside the country, is there a consideration to take somebody of such a high profile, perhaps, to the International Criminal Court to push for an international arrest warrant for this particular individual who has the privilege of traveling around the world without consequence whatsoever? And somebody else can mention his name if they want to. He is a prince. but has there been a consideration about preparing a case for the International Criminal Court and taking it that far? And I address that question to you, actually, Ghina.
Well, all the procedures that should be taken by human rights organizations and the victims and their families, internationally I'm speaking, have been taken. All forms of appeals that could be taken have been taken. But the results, well, mostly the international organizations or so on that can actually do something. Their decisions are not obligatory. That's the problem. Their decisions are mostly like advices and so on, so like they display what goes on, what the information that they receive, they can display it, they can check whether it's true or not. But to take effective measures, that's not in their hand. That's the problem. Speaking about courts, international courts. Well, to be honest, there was not enough compliance not because they do not want to comply, but because how do you prove such events happen? There has to be evidence. When such procedures happen in Bahrain, there usually are no evidence because the authorities are all complicit with each other. When the courts are complicit with the government, which is unlawful according to the Bahraini constitution. So to say, could this happen? I think, I don't want to assume that it has happened for true, but could this happen? Could he be taken to court? I think there were procedures that were already taken, but they did not give any fruitful results, sadly.
Okay, that's troubling. It's just that I'm watching countries occasionally, for example, like in the case of Duterte from the Philippines, that there are countries who are willing to implement international arrest warrants, and we'll talk, I'm sure, about that at length at some other time. I have a question for yourself, Said Yusuf Al-Muhafdha, if I may, and it has with regards to individuals who are interfacing with the United Nations for the Human Rights Commission or with the ICC or whatever, people who are visiting from Bahrain. Are there still punitive measures taken against people who make statements at the UN for the Human Rights Council? I know that recently the two of the Baharna who were on the flotilla to Gaza, for example, they were apprehended when they got back to Bahrain and taken in for questioning for being involved with the flotilla, for example. I know that people were arrested last week in Bahrain for various protests, and that there are claims of torture also from last week. So these things are right up to date. Nothing is in the annals of history. It is still continuing. And I want to ask you, Said Yusuf, because you also live outside, people who are coming from Bahrain to make statements in international forums, are they still going home to the same punitive measures being taken against them as they were in the past when you and I had worked together?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And my answer would be that that the tactics have been little bit changed, but the orders are the same. So I think sometimes they use the time sometimes they use the time when they make this revenge or retaliation to those who participate, and also they choose to whom or when. It's not so, I would not say that they make all of them at the same, they don't treat all of people at the same level and tone and retaliation. So it's for them, I would say they change their tactics, and also they have kind of a case by case. So what I want to say, for example, in terms of international engagement with international forums or any events in general, either, as you have said, to Gaza or to any other international events, that if I speak only from yesterday, not long time, Ibrahim Sharif, a prominent political opposition leader. He participated in an event in Beirut, and when he came to Bahrain directly from the plane, they don't. I mean, the person is living in Bahrain, and he is living in Bahrain. He's coming to Bahrain. He has a permanent address. I mean, why you are very, so just show you, I mean, that the kind of retaliation of people who participate an international event. We are not sure until now. He is right now in the public prosecution, so I cannot comment what is the official charges. But in general, it's his engagement in international event. It was an international event in Beirut. And going to Geneva, for example, Ibtisam al-Sayegh participated in September in Human Rights Council, and she was engaged with the UN mechanism. Yes, when she came back, she was not arrested, but she was subjected until today, until now, she's subjected to hate speech, in social media, and incitement the government to punish her because she did, because she criticized the government of Bahrain international level. So she is subjected right until now to hate speech, and also so it's always different from case to case, but in general, yes. I mean, also in order to that, there are also other type of tactics, which is travel ban. Until now, there are many activists are subjected to travel bans, either in completely or to specific country. Like I know activists who are not allowed to travel to Saudi Arabia or to UAE, but they can travel to other country. This is also a point of soft punishment to activists to restrict their right to movement, and also a punishment that because they are activists. And so they use this GCC agreement or GCC security agreement to punish activists. So I mean, I would say, so it's not the one way they use all of this. So social media, restriction of travel, arrest in some cases, mistreatment, and also sometimes many people lose their job, or they don't give them a license to open a business, and they let them without a job, without an income. So the way of punishment, they try to make it not that much noisy and very clear, so that did not drag the attention of the media. So they put that in consideration, but they make it like smart and soft, but the order is the same: punishment, or any people who has different opinion, any individual who participate in international event, and but be smart to choose the good time and the good methodology or way.
Yeah, I've always found it very disturbing to listen to the accounts of how exactly the regime suppresses people and also takes revenge. It's got a particularly cruel, personal, insidious method of doing it. You talked earlier about how the tactics of torture had been trained to them largely by the British Empire. And also those different methods of how to attack people in a very personal, quiet, dark way that makes them feel silenced or alone and unheard. And also the different, it's very personal. It's like they take individual cases and individual people. They look at the person's whole life and how to impact them, even through their children, and not allowing the children to have grants for university and things like that. So the different, yeah, it's very, very disturbing. I think it would make for a great paper or thesis for someone in university to look at the extrapolations of the various different types of punitive measures. I have a question for yourself, Ilef, if I may. You had mentioned with regards essentially to lawfare and the state using lawfare against people. So the architecture of impunity. And I'm wondering, with regards to the National Human Rights Institute, that they are doing a performance, that they are creating workshops, that there are visits, but there's no real outcomes for that can be proven. Also broadly with regards to medical neglect of prisoners, and on Article 16 with regards to solitary confinement and collective punishments. I wanted to ask you if there are ways, or if there's even faith in the ability to somehow interface with the NHRI to strengthen their capacity? Is there even a will to do that, considering the duplicitousness with which they conduct all of their affairs? Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. As I said earlier, like the issue with the different bodies and mechanisms that Bahrain present as like achievements, the issue is the lack of independence. So I believe that all of these bodies are just performative to be able to perform compliance before like within international fora. As it was like mentioned by colleagues and by you, like there are different forms of torture in Bahrain, but it's also quite invisible, and there's this lack of political will and this complacency from like different kinds of powers, not to say like Western powers mainly, but also neighboring countries who shield like these violations. That's what makes it like problematic for like the world to speak up about Bahrain. I believe that, I mean, the independence of the NHRI, it depends on the political will of Bahrain to change things. It needs autonomy. It needs like clear like measures, but also like mainly it needs autonomy and independence to be able to function properly and to actually protect human rights in the country. But I will also return, it's like it's our mandate, it's what we push for. I mean, the ratification of the optional protocol to the convention is necessary for the creation of a national preventive mechanism that hopefully would be independent, because it's like governed by clear international rules that this national preventive mechanism needs to comply to. So yes, hopefully this is, I mean, definitely this would be one of the recommendations of the committee during the review. The issue is that it has been a recommendation before, but it hasn't been implemented. Hopefully this time, like even if they do it in a performative way, there are so many organizations, like even international partners of ours who support countries and governments to implement actual national preventive mechanisms. But like I keep repeating it, I mean, we know the nature of governance in Bahrain, and it will always depend on the political will of the government. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Ilef.
I hope I answered your question.
I was very dismayed to hear that the arrest that was made yesterday that you mentioned, Said Yusuf Al-muhafdha. And, you know, things like, for example, I know that just a couple of months ago, after 4 years of not even seeing anyone and also being in solitary confinement, Hassan Mashema, who himself suffers from cancer and has no access to adequate medical care, and Abdullah Singais had managed to see each other for 5 minutes after 4 years, both of them from solitary confinement. And you know, the joy that they would have felt as brothers from so many years apart from each other, and then to be torn away from each other so quickly with no hope of seeing anyone again for a significant period of time. It is so cruel and inhuman, and it can be stopped. So my point on that is that just because we are used to it and exhausted by it, it doesn't mean that it's right or that it becomes less for us just because we're used to it. I know that you may have a couple of final points to make. I'd like to give the floor very quickly, if I may, to each one of you. If you could call for something specific that we can action straight away to make change in advance of this next session, please tell me what it would be. And I hand it to yourself, Ghina, first.
Well, I want to talk about something very important very quickly. I know we have exceeded the time. I'm sorry for it, to everyone. the importance of advocacy. Many people ask us, you as human rights organizations, what did you do? What did you effect? What fruits came out of your work? I want to say something. This work is very important. If there's anything that causes pressure on the Bahraini government to take, if not radical measures, but at least few measures, or at least like some quick measures that prisoners do need, it's the pressure caused by these organizations. I want to give an example. Sayyid Yusuf al-muhafdha, for example, he mentioned Ibtisam al-Sayed. She attended the UPR in 2017, went to Bahrain, straight to prison, sexual assault, torture, and so on. Because of the pressure, because of the advocacy that was made for her, in 2022, she went back to Bahrain, back to Geneva, to the UPR, and then when she came back to Bahrain, they could not torture her again because there was so much advocacy for her. Advocacy, okay, some prisoners in prison are ill. I mentioned they are sick. They need medical treatment. Some of them have chronic diseases like diabetes. They need their insulin injections and so on. Sometimes they don't get it. By advocacy, we can at least solve some few cases that cannot wait a radical change. I want to also mention an old story, but it is important, of Hakim al-Uraibi, who was a football player. He was sentenced to prison arbitrarily. Then he went to Australia. From there he went tourism to Thailand. Sorry, speaking very quickly. And he was going to be extradited back to Bahrain. It was the Australian people, their advocacy, the football audience that held banners in every football game that he should be returned, that caused the pressure, that made the Australian government demand his return. People are humane. People, we don't have to convince people or the public opinion to have solidarity. They only need to know. So our work is important, and what's also important is for us to be able to convey it through media. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ghina. Deewanshi, last words from yourself, sister.
Yes, I just want to, whatever I've said in my recommendations, I want to urge Bahraini authorities to restore independent access and oversight. Also, as Mr. Syed also highlighted, the visit of the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, which is pending for years, it will activate and aid the monitoring of the detention facilities and the violations that are happening in Bahrain. And secondly, I just want to end with a note that torture is not just a political issue. It is a crime under international law, and the ending of torture is not a matter of just goodwill, but it is a matter which should be held with accountability. And these are the last words from my end. Thank you.
Thanks, Deewanshi. You've actually reminded me something I wanted to say. And this is broadly, it's not to each of you, but broadly for the audience and those people many hundreds whom I know will eventually watch this from Bahrain, with regards to their own experience of torture. And I know this now far better than myself than I did up until the last couple of months. There is a personal difficulty in documenting your own torture. It is deeply disturbing. It re-traumatizes you, but there needs to be more assistance for people who want to leave the legacy of the history of their torture behind, so that at some point in the future, cases can be taken so that this impunity ends. And I just want to encourage individuals to try to find ways to document the grievances that they have felt against themselves that are real, that they are victims, although they are survivors, to please document what has happened, because down the road it is going to help towards transitional justice, and then for those perpetrators eventually to be held to account, it will happen. I want to give the floor to Sayyid Yusuf. You have any last words there, Sayyid Yusuf, for us?
I think already many people already said that our role right now, I mean, in this event and to make the awareness, but it's that, I mean, it's the action should be taken from the people who are listening to us or hearing us, to make the solidarity and to make things happen, because we cannot work without, I mean, it's a collective work, I would say. So this is one thing. The other thing is just also to the international, organization or foundation that inside Bahrain there are a massive restriction to civil society, and most of the human rights defender and an organization are operated right now in exile. So we want them to more cooperate with those Bahraini NGOs who are located in exile, because not possible for them. I know a lot of condition for foundation and that the organization or the person should be inside Bahrain, but this is something cannot be happen. So I'd encourage them to kind of skip this measurement or requirement. Sorry. The final thing, it's also already I have said that, but I will say that repeatedly that we do have more than 2,000 person released from jail. Most of them, almost the majority, have been subjected to torture or psychological torture. They need to have a rehabilitation center. The government of Bahrain are encouraged to open a rehabilitation center to look onto those cases and to work on rehabilitation, integration, and reparation, accountability, and all of the topic that I already mentioned.
Thanks, Said Yusuf. You're absolutely right. And it's really the least that they can do or should do as a duty to the civilians in the country. So many of them, dozens and dozens of them, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and needing to reintegrate in a wholesome way back into their society after the dreadful times that they've had in prison, which I wanted to say my very best for Ibrahim Sharif, by the way. And when someone is speaking to his wife, to please give my respect to her. She's a very long-suffering woman too, as is the wife of Abdul Hadi Al Khawaja and all of the families. Lastly, I just want to hand over to Ilef KASSAB, if I may. We want to have unfettered access for the Special Rapporteur on Torture to be able to have access to the country. Ilef, what else can we be pushing for, and what mechanisms can we use to try to create pressure for that to happen? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. First of all, I would like to commend the courage and perseverance of Bahraini human rights defenders operating from the ground, from Bahrain, and for doing it despite the risks that you face every day, but also the human rights defenders operating from exile, who also face transnational repression. It is only through you and through your organizations that NGOs like OMCT can actually help out and do something about it. And that's how it can work, only through partners on the ground. Please keep documenting. Documentation is super important. It helps for evidence-based advocacy before different international fora and different UN mechanisms or EU mechanisms as well. One thing's for sure, wherever you will go or we will go, and to any mechanism UN mechanism or UN review or treaty body we go to, for Bahrain, we won't expect anything new for them. They will always try to launder their image. So at least our narrative needs to be present to show the reality of things on the ground. I believe we also need to act together. We need to create an actual movement as Bahraini civil society. It's advisable that you don't work alone and that you don't find yourselves in a closed space. It's important to share experiences, lessons learned, whether it is amongst GCC countries GCC, civil society organizations, but also in general, like the MENA region, because through everything you've documented, through the analysis we've done of the situation, there are so many similarities, not only within GCC countries, but also in the MENA region in general. So it is super important that we work together, that we advocate together, that not only Bahraini NGOs or like international NGOs work with you, no, even like NGOs from Egypt, from Syria, from Morocco, from Tunisia should all speak out about your plight as well. And that's what we need to do for each like of the countries of the region. Because if we don't do that, I mean, I feel like countries copy each other. If we are silent about like torture in Bahrain, we will find like same patterns in Egypt. We will find same patterns in Saudi Arabia. There will be same patterns in Tunisia. So we need to know, like, to build strategies, like collective strategies together, and to work together and to create like a real and sustainable regional movement. To answer your question, Tara, there are so many mechanisms that we need to go to, or like that we can go to. There's the special rapporteur on torture. It's true that like for an in-country visit, she needs to be invited by the government, even though the mandate made the request since 2011. But there are other options. If, for instance, you organize seminars, you can invite her. If whether it is like in person, but I don't believe you can do that in Bahrain. But we've done this in other countries where when the government doesn't accept the request of the special rapporteur on torture or like other special rapporteurs to visit, local organizations invite them as experts, and that way they can meet with NGOs and with journalists, etc. So that's an option. But there's also the option of like individual complaints, allegation letters that you can send for at least the special mechanisms of the UN can know about what's actually happening. And other than the special rapporteur on torture, there are so many other treaty bodies that you can go to. There are so many other working groups. We have the working group on arbitrary detention, the working group on enforced disappearances. So there are like a plethora of mechanisms we can go to advocate for a change. If we can push, like, seriously, some of the mandates, like the UN mandates, are really, really willing to do like more than their work and to cooperate and work with other mandates. So yeah, for now, I mean, we don't have so many options. So even though countries like Bahrain use the UN mechanisms to launder their image, we also need to counter that narrative with evidence-based advocacy and with the information you can collect from the ground. And that's where your force lies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ilef. But, you know, we cannot despair when we know that collectively there's so much more that we can do, and that gives us the encouragement and the light that we need to keep going. I see no questions raised from the floor. I think we have used all of the time that's been allocated to us, although there are hours and hours more of conversation that we could have. I look forward very warmly to the next event that we can share together, and anything with regards to strategy and capacity building for undertaking the many tasks that Ilef has suggested, and building the capacity of people to be able to interface with all of those things. I'm warmly looking forward to that. Thank you very much to Montada Bahrain, to all of the organizations who have joined us today, for the work of all of these tremendous human rights defenders, whom I'm delighted to see together again. I wish you all a good afternoon. For all of our viewers, keep your eyes on Bahrain, please. Raise the name of the country Bahrain with every one of your other solidarity exercises. It is very easy to say the words Bahrain, Sudan, Congo, Palestine, all in the same breath. We are all together on these things. Thank you. Good afternoon.